Sruti Mohapatra with us today. For the benefit of the participants, I would like to introduce our esteemed resource person. Dr. Sruti Mohapatra is the founder and chief executive of Swabhiman, Disability Information and Resource Center, and also the chief coordinator of Anjali, a project for inclusive and joyful learning. By her pioneering efforts, disability has become not only visible but an important social issue for Odisha and Indian government and the civil society. Under her leadership, many groundbreaking changes have happened in Odisha for the persons with disabilities. She has been in the forefront of all major legislative and policy changes for the disabled in India in the last 27 years. She has conceptualized several innovative programs for children and youth, and children like Shakshit, Shaksham, Sandhan, YLTEP, Prerna Awards, and Swabalamban. She is the 2021 Nari Shakti Award winner from President of India. Now, I would like to hand over this mic to our esteemed resource person to carry on the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Namaskar and good evening. I'm delighted to be with all of you and share a few insights. So jumping into the topic, I would like to tell you why I am part of this disability movement. Why do they call me a disability expert? And why are we talking about disability? Even something more focused within the disability movement, that is gender and disability and the intersectionality we are going to talk about. Now, these are wonderful times for people with disabilities. I hope most of you out there know a little about. How many of you know about disability and what has been your understanding of disability? Can one or two people just share their experiences with me, their understanding? Okay, anyone who knows how the journey of disability started? Anyone knows? Who knows? Because accordingly, I'm going to change my the way I talk, because then I will have to give you a lot of backgrounders and not just a focus on the topic. Okay.
Hello.
Let's.
May I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are. Please tell me your name.
My name is Sandeep Kumar Pal from Delhi. Actually, disability nowadays, disability considered as a diversity. But in the previous days, in the long ago, it was not. In the earlier phase, it treated as a charity model, as a medical model, as a social model, and nowadays shifting from right-based model, that is inclusion.
Okay, thank you. See, basically, so I'm good. So you have some background. Now, disability has traveled a long journey. Now, way back, if you go to the ancient time, we find that people with disabilities, they were hidden in their homes. They were burnt and killed on birth because nobody wanted to get associated with the stigma called as disability. And why so? Because it was always considered as a sin. It was considered that if a person with disability is born in your house, it means generations across have committed sins. Or people with disabilities were considered as abnormal creatures. As time moved on, we moved from sin and abnormality to charity, then to the social model, and finally, today we are in the crossroads where we are trying to identify disability either into the equality or into the equity model. But the underlying theme is human rights. And this paradigm shift happened in 2006, when the United Nations Convention declared disability as people with disabilities are those whose rights are equivalent to all people with disabilities. And what does this mean? If I am a child with disability, my rights are the same as any child in India. So I'm talking in the context of India. If I'm a child born in the USA, my rights are the same as any child in the US. And if I'm a woman with disability here in India, then my rights is equal to the human rights of all women in India. And this paradigm shift brought about a major thinking, a major change in the discourse on disability. In the educational sphere, in the literary sphere, in the academic sphere, in the engineering sphere, in the policy sphere, everywhere we started working from the perspective of human rights. Can I share my screen, Akshay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Is it visible to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. So why today we are talking about this is because the international government, the national governments, and the local governments, all the governments are speaking in one language. And what is that? Development is not possible if you keep any section of the population away or apart. Inclusion is the most important thing that is needed for the development of, it can be a village, it can be a state, it can be a country, or it can be the world soever. When this came into being with the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, more academic interpretations started. And one of those which has gained a lot of importance with SDG number 5, which is gender equity. Sustainable Development Goal number 5 is looking at gender imbalances, gender intersectionality as far as people with disabilities are concerned. This picture, what does this picture tell you? Can anyone interpret this picture? This picture is speaking about many things. First, it is beyond colors. We are not talking about race and culture. Okay? So intersectionality comes into being when we go beyond color of the skin, when we go beyond religion, we go beyond physical and intellectual challenges that people face. We go beyond the country borders. Only then intersectionality comes into being. And intersectionality, understanding intersectionality is important to create comprehensive development plans for social equity, for economic development. So there are three words. Let me take you back to the previous slide. There are three important words in this topic. One is gender, one is disability, and one is intersectionality. So let us focus a little on these three words. Gender. So what is gender? All of you, I just mentioned Sustainable Development Goal 5. So it is either of the two sexes, whether male and female, when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So this is not about men versus women, right? It is not about boys from Mars and girls from Venus. We're not talking about those kind of things. What we are talking about, our reference points here are social and cultural differences. How our biological differences. If I'm a woman and there is a man, if both of us are disabled and both of us are sitting on wheelchair, yet we find the male counterpart getting more privileges than the woman. If we are talking about a young boy and a young girl in the family setup, same age, same university, same subjects, yet we find that there are certain privileges, there are certain freedoms which are enjoyed by the boy more than it is enjoyed by the girl. So the term gender very broadly denotes a range of identities which go far beyond male and female biological representatives. So in this context that we are going to discuss in the slides ahead is our reference pointer, women with disabilities. So the second word which is so important in this is disability. What is disability? So a disability is any condition. It is not, let us not go into the definitions of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Let us not go to the different models, social models, this model, medical model, sin model, culture model, religion model. Let us think of it from a very functional perspective. So a disability is any condition that makes it more difficult for a person to do certain activities effectively or interact across the world. Now, suppose one of you, if we go back 34 years to be specific, I was just like you, young, with an eye full of dreams, and I had a passion in me to change the world. So the first decision that I took in my college career was I want to become a civil servant, join the Indian bureaucracy, and I did qualify the examination in my first attempt, and I was all set. But then I met with an accident, and this accident broke my spinal cord, and I became a quadriplegic. So if you look at the word quadriplegic, it means quadri, means four. So my spinal cord at the level of my neck, which is called the cervical region, it got fractured, and everything below my neck is paralyzed. So right now when I sit and take your class, I'm sitting on a wheelchair. If I'm not sitting on a wheelchair, but on any chair which doesn't have a back support, or if the chair has a low back, then you will just touch me with your finger and give me a little nudge and I will fall down because I have no sensation, no mobility, no functional ability below my neck region. That's quadriplegia. So this, what happens when you get a disability? So these conditions, disabling conditions, are also called as impairments. And my impairment is physical, but there are impairments which are mental, which are sensory, which are developmental, and sometimes they are a combination of multiple factors. In India, our new law, Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, has identified 21 categories of disabilities which are recognized by the government, and people in these 21 categories, if they have 40% and more disabilities, they are eligible for different government entitlements like getting scholarships, disability pension, Indira Awas Yojana, concession in train travel, concession is bus travel, etc., etc., etc. Now, what happens when people with disabilities suffer from these different kind of impairments? They become unnecessarily isolated and excluded. And why? You might ask a question. Someone who can speak so well like me, someone who is highly educated like me, someone who qualified the Indian civil services in the first attempt, a gold medalist, a 3 times national debating champion. What happened? Why the wheelchair excluded her and she was rejected from the service? It is because our society, I'm talking about 1987, it is because our society was not ready to accept people who were different from a certain norm that they knew. And what is this norm? 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 legs, 2 hands, walking straight, able to see, able to hear. So our world was designed to accommodate people who had functional hands, legs, eyes, ears. So any deviation, in my case, paralysis from my neck below, which made my fingers bend, where I needed a wheelchair. The world was not designed. So I was isolated for the first almost 10 years of my life. And even now, all of you must be seeing that. More than 80% of people with disabilities are excluded from mainstream participation because of lack of ramps, lack of signages for the hearing impaired, lack of books in alternate print in the libraries of your colleges, your playgrounds, your annual functions, your dramatic club, your music club. None of these have accommodations. None of these are designed so that people who are a little different can participate in that. Now, now let us understand a few facts about women with disabilities before we move ahead. So these are some of the facts that we must understand. I will give you comparative statements of people with disabilities as I move between people with disabilities and women with disabilities. So it has been recently estimated that more than 1 billion people are experiencing disabilities. If you look at India, the last census, and let me talk about one state, then it becomes easy for you to understand. Let us talk about the state of Odisha where I live. Now the census in 2011 said that we are 12,44,000, and this was 2011. Now it is 2022. I mean, theoretically, it should have happened last year in 2021, but because of the COVID-19, it could not be conducted. So if we consider even a decadal growth of 10 years, there is a decadal growth of population. It can never be the same old figure of 2.1% in India or 12,44,000. Add to it, in 2015, the World Report on Disability came out and it said that 15% of the population has a disability, which means you calculate the number. And then if you look at the third thing, which is the RPWD Act or the new disability law in India, it stated that how many people? It stated about it increased the number of disabilities from 7 to 21. So if you look at these three things, the increase in the number of scheduled disabilities, 7 to 21, 15% as people with disabilities among the population of India, and the decadal growth which has happened from 2011. You can see for yourself that people with disabilities in a small state like India would be close to 60 to 70 lakhs. And now calculate the whole of India and look at that staggering figure. So when we make our policies and schemes based on the old number, say 12,44,000, allocate budget according to it. Neither we are getting educated, nor all of us are literate. We are falling out of, dropping out of our schools. We are not employed. So this section of population is very much underrepresented in the policies and schemes and the budget of India. And if you look at the number of women with disabilities, then if you calculate the prevalence rate in female population, then about 1 in every 5 women has a disability. And mental illness is a category where women with disabilities far exceed. And we know that, and we also know that the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated it. And as per 2011 census, 44% of the population has some or other disability. Now let us come to the UN fact sheet on women and girl child with disabilities. So all these things you can read. I don't need to tell you one by one, but I will go on telling you, as I told you, comparative between people with disabilities and women and girl child with disabilities. There are 5 things that we need to remember. Number 1, that it is a huge population, which I just explained to you. Number 2, it is a homogeneous, it is not a homogeneous population. Suppose you say disability, gender, then immediately the picture that comes to your mind is male and female. Suppose you say class, class 3. Immediately the image that comes to your mind is 8-year-olds, 7-year, 8-year-old. So if you say cricketers, immediately a picture that comes to your mind is men's team or women's team in cricket. Immediately the thing, people with skills in playing cricket, whether men and women. But when you say disability, that is the picture that comes to your mind is a confused gray area picture. Why? Because we are a heterogeneous group. You move from the eyes to the ears. You move from the ears to the head. You move from the head to the hand. You move from the hand to the legs. Even a 5-degree change in position brings about severe changes in the challenges that are faced, in the functional adaptations that are to be made, in the reasonable accommodation to be done. So the entire picture completely changes. So this heterogeneity must be kept in mind when we are planning or designing something that we want to do. Now coming to women and girl child with disability, what is here happening? The UNESCO report says in 2019 that most children between 0 to 8 years of age are not in the school, children with disabilities. If you look at girls and girl child and women, then the literacy rate goes down to 1%. If men, it is 3%. In case of women, it is going down to 1%. If you take all these men and women with disabilities and you put them in one state of India, then it will be the 5th largest state of India after Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat. But you know what will be the characteristic of this state? It will be most uneducated. It will have the maximum infant mortality. It will be the sickest state. It will be the most uneducated, the most unemployable, and the poorest of India's state. Because when you look at what is happening to men and women with disabilities, we will find that this group is very vulnerable and marginalized. And among this group, women with disabilities are further marginalized and a smaller group. Akshay, please keep on telling me the time, how much time I have left, so that I speak accordingly. You know, sometimes I just go on and on and on. And the other characteristics that we need to remember about women with disabilities as a group is this group suffers the maximum violence. So when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, many things came to the forefront. See, all of us know that a lot of changes have been happening recently. More increase in the number of enrollment in the school, that is, more number of people of disabilities going to the school. We also heard that more number of young women with disabilities are taking various skill development courses. More number of them are becoming self-employed. More of them are setting up their own independent ventures. But what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic? The lockdown and the shutdown impacted people with disabilities much more than the rest of the society. And among this group of people with disabilities, the women, do you know why? Because most of our women, and in fact, most of these people with disabilities, they work in the unorganized sectors, in the private sectors. And if you remember, when the shutdowns and lockdowns happened, all businesses closed and all the private businesses, and I'm talking about small and medium scale industries, I'm talking about individual entrepreneurs, I'm talking about small businesses. Overnight, everything closed. So most people with disabilities, and I can confidently say, because we don't have exact statistics, 95% of people with disabilities overnight became unemployed. Overnight had no access to money. Overnight became poorest of the poor. And among these categories, it was women with disabilities who suffered the most. Number one, lost their jobs. Number two, with the shutting down of the schools, shutting down of the businesses, people stayed home. Everything became digital overnight. And women with disabilities were not just added to their work, they had to take care of their children if they were married. They have to take care of their spouses who stayed back home. They had to take up the extra burden of educating. They had the extra burden of cutting costs so that people would not go hungry in their houses. And in this circle, vicious circle that was happening, I think it happened in every household in India, because more than 85% of people in India belong to the middle class and lower middle class. And hardly 7% are rich, 3% are super rich or the richest of the rich. So most Indians had a difficult time. And what happens when the family goes through a financial cut, when it goes to mental stress? There is increase in violence in the family. There is increase in abuse. And who experienced this? Women, particularly women with disabilities. They became scapegoats of their families. Increased violence, increased beatings, increased sexual abuse. So what came when organizations, academic experts, they started doing surveys and researches? In fact, I had an organization called Swabhiman. We also did a couple of studies. We were shocked by the amount of violence women with disabilities, girl child with disabilities, boys with disabilities experienced at home. When food was short, it was the woman with disability who went hungry. When there was only one smartphone at home, it was shared between the father who had to work and the son, the male child with disability, to study. Or if there were children without disabilities at home, then education of the children with disability was not considered important, and they remained away from school, away from education. Apart from that, children with disabilities also experienced another kind of vulnerability. And what was it? Most children with disabilities, visually impaired, hearing impaired, those with cognitive disabilities, those with learning disabilities, for them, we have not created an accessible internet, an accessible website, an accessible virtual learning. So rest of the children, rest of India became very comfortable sitting at home, studying from home, working from home. This group of people with disabilities were a double disadvantage, lost their jobs, and even if they were being offered to work from home, they neither had the hardware nor the software with which they could go back to the virtual schools, go back to the virtual workplaces. Now let us come to the third word in our topic, gender, women. Now let us come to intersectionality. So can somebody tell me how much time I have left, so that I can design my time accordingly?
Ma'am, it's 6:33.
Okay, so right, that's okay. So now let's come to the third word, which is intersectionality. Now, can any one of you out there give me a very simple definition of intersectionality? What do you understand when I use this word called as intersectionality? Yes, please. Hello. So can anyone tell me what is intersectionality? Intersection. What is intersection?
Hi, ma'am. This is Akshita.
Yes.
So what I understand out of intersectionality is we are not just looking at one criteria, say it be it gender or race or disability. We are looking at all the aspects. Uh, is that what is intersectionality, ma'am?
Yes. So this
Okay.
Ma'am,
actually,
hello.
this word, yes, thank you, Akshara.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Yes. So intersectionality. Now, what is it? It is intersection is when two different things we are considering, they're overlapping between each other. We are talking about that intersection here in simple literary words. Now, when we talk about intersectionality, actually this word, it evolved from the feminism or the feminine movement or the movement by women, and this term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the year 1989. So, what did the feminist scholars do? The feminist scholars, they adopted and they expanded upon intersectionality as a conceptual framework. They used as a framework, and they used it as an analytical tool. And how they used it? They said that every woman, apart from being a woman, has many other roles to play, and it is actually has many dimensions. So this multi-dimensionality, this such a beautiful word. I really liked it. Multi-dimensionality of individuals' lived experience, it also tells us how they have been oppressed, because they were the feminist scholars and they were talking about feminism. So their focus was to show how a woman multitasks, how a woman lives a life of multidimensionality, and how they are oppressed in each and every dimension of theirs. So they took many dimensions of a woman's life. They talked about their education, their culture, their caste, their sexes, their marital life. So all the dimensions were, and as a working mother or somebody, a homemaker, and on the basis of that, they tried to measure how women were standing up over the years against different kind of oppression, and how they were being represented in literature and in other things. The scholars, these authors, these academic scholars, they started expounding upon something very interesting, and they said that the feminist movement and the disability movement, there is a strong intersection. And why they kept repeating? Because they said that disability rights movement and feminism, when they became movements, why did they become movements? We must first focus on that. Now they became movements because they were oppressed. Women were also oppressed. They were not getting the same pay. They were not, they had to go back after hours of work and do all the housework. Men were not doing that. They had less pay for the same work that they did. So there a movement started. And the demand actually started, the feminism movement, it grew. Equal pay for equal work. That was their basic concept. And disability movement, why it started? Because here people felt that they were oppressed. They were not part of the mainstream movement. Their rights were not being respected. Many people with disabilities who were taxpayers. See, my basic reason of getting involved in the disability movement was because of the anger within me. I was working, I was paying taxes, but I was not getting equal rights. There were no roads for me. None of the buses were accessible. None of the toilets were accessible. Think about us in 1987, go back there, 89, 90, till 95. There were no toilets that we could use if we went to a mall or a hotel. And in the earlier days, you know what I used to request the hotel managers? Can you please remove the toilet door so that my wheelchair could go inside? And the toilet door was kept open because they could not put anything there. So there was a little anger among the disability people with disabilities who were educated, and also even those who were not educated, who were working, who were earning, who were taking care of their families, as to why don't we have equal rights? And that's how the disability, and we were going to schools and colleges. We were being discriminated in every respect. People with visual impairment in colleges and the university, they did not have access to book. They were not, it was dependent upon the individual teachers, whether the lecturer or the professor would allow them to record the lesson that was going on in the class in the tape recorder, because it was not institutionalized. And that's how this civil movement led to the founding of the first strong law in the world, which was the Americans with Disability Act, followed by the Equality Act of the United Kingdom. Ours came much later in 1995 with many flaws. But today in India world, India has one of the strongest laws with the strongest clauses, whereas there are punishment if you don't violate the mandates, which is Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016. So let me go back to the intersectionality. You see, the first disability movements were just like the feminist movement. They were all homogeneous. They were all unified. A group of leaders in the disability sector, they spoke for every person with disability. Because what did they think? They thought that the other things like race, like culture, like sexuality, gender, these needs, these challenges, they will be taken care of by the respective movements. And this is exactly what was the feminism movement was all about. Here, one small group of women, they represented all women. But later on, in fact, there is a little bit of contradiction. Disability activists say that the feminism movement borrowed a lot of things from the disability sector. The feminism movement says the disability sector, actually the disability rights movement borrowed a lot of things, a lot of characters from their movement. But whatever, I feel both the movements have come forward a long way, and they have a lot of commonality. So initially, disability movements, they ignored the internal differences. Like if a person with physical impairment, somebody on wheelchair, was the head of an organization, then those with visually impaired, hearing impaired, mental illness, intellectual challenges, autism, he or she spoke for all these people without understanding the cross disability challenges, without understanding specific challenges of the different groups. So small splinters arose, but the disability movement, it very quickly came to the understanding that we are oppressed, we are marginalized. So we have to all come together. And how do we come together? When we understand each other. That's how the cross disability understanding started. And I must mention my colleague, someone with whom I started work, and we worked together till his last breath, is late Javed Abidi, who was the first person to bring about cross disability movement in India by bringing Disabled People's International to a stronger state and creating the India chapter of Disabled People's International, which has a consultative status in the United Nations and talks about the rights of the disabled in everything, every decision that is being taken by the United Nations. Javed was also one of he had a very good vision. So Javed said that as long as we are all splintered, blind talking about the blind in India, the deaf talking about the deaf in India, we will not get our basic rights, we will not get the roads, we will not get inclusive education, we will not get accessibility. It is necessary we come together. And that's how the National Disability Network, the National Committee on Rights of Persons with Disabilities came out in India. And together we have been working towards our right. And this understanding of the disability rights movement also finds reflection in the feminism movement, where very quickly the feminism movement also adopted the rights of transgender women, the rights of the different kinds of sexuality and gender orientation. And when all these women came together in one big group, they started demanding that we be treated at par with men, whether it is in the parliament or whether it is in the university or whether it is in the society. Now, coming to the social model of disability. If you look at the social model of disability, here also you find a lot of intersection with the feminist theory. So according to the social model, disability is not a biological condition, but how it is created? It is created by the built environment. So when society does not design itself so that it can cater to different kinds of individuals. See, we are long, we are short, we are fat, we are thin, we have leg fractures, we have hand fractures, we have amputation, somebody is pregnant, somebody undergoes a cardiac surgery, somebody has a fractured leg, somebody needs to walk in a very gentle gait. So all these different kinds of conditions must be taken into consideration when designing built structures, when designing offices, when designing schools and colleges. So this was what the social model of disability said. It said that do not consider people with disabilities as people with defects or who are to be corrected, which the medical model said. But it is the society which has to rectify and redesign itself. So also you find in the feminist theory that women are not disabled. Women are getting disabled. Women are getting marginalized because of some very ancient and archaic social laws, norms, practices, regulations, and customs. And this needs to change. So this is one of the major intersection between gender and disability, which was captured by both the movements respectively, and actually became a foundation for the major changes that are happening now. In case of disability, actually it was the social model which slowly moved forward to the economic model, and finally the United Nations in 2016 brought about a paradigm shift with the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability. And as I have said earlier, what did it say? It said that right of every disabled person is equal to human rights. Similarly, we also have a convention on women, and it very, in a very, see, the conventions, they are not laws. But if you are a member of the United Nations, about 165 countries of the world are, and if you are a UN member, then whenever United Nations comes out with a convention, then all your domestic laws have to be restructured. And that is how today in India, just as in different parts of the world, gender has become so prominent. We have a women's commission in India, which is very, very powerful. Every police station has to now have a women Mahila Thana. It has to have a women's Thana in every town. It has to have a women desk, women and child desk in every police station. We have a department, Women and Child Development Department. We have a ministry, Women and Child Welfare Ministry. So gender has come to a very strong representation, and one of the reason is, as I have told you earlier, they are 44% of the population, men and women, and that is the reason now another milestone is, we have not reached it, but I am also in its favor and I have been writing about it a lot. That is the parliament. You see, once in the parliament, we have a 33% reservation. You see, in the parliament, the political parties are always in loggerheads, right? The ruling government and opposition, they do not see eye to eye. And as a result, many laws are not getting passed. But do you know this? Whenever the women's bill is introduced, whenever we talk about 33% reservation for women, all political parties come together because they don't want women there. As a result of this, very poor representation in India's legislation, very low representation in the judiciary. If you look at all the academic universities, the colleges, the law universities, the medical colleges, and you go to the corporate bodies, when you look at the boards, you will find large number of women teachers in the school, large number of women lecturers in the university. But when it comes to the top, the syndicate, you'll find very few representation of women. If you go to the corporate houses, go to the top, the board has very few representation of women. Go to the parliament. So this change. Once this change happens, India will become a place which will give equity to its women. That stage is far, far away for people with disabilities because we do not have that 40-50% reservation. What more is required is that when we do our next census counting, we become more sensitive. The enumerators, the last rung in the ladder of counting, who actually go to the villages, understand that disability is not something to feel ashamed of. Even now in the villages, people are ashamed of disability. Even now in the villages, people consider disabled people a burden. Even now they think that all that they're eligible for is a rehabilitation services or a disability pension. Education in the broad sense of it, employment in the broad sense of it, a bread earner, the supreme bread earner of the family, a person who can lead a family, these have not yet happened. That is the reason you will find that most people with disabilities in India, they remain single and they are considered as burden. Coming to another intersectionality, which is actually a contradiction. Since long, women have been considered as people who are responsible for bringing the next generation to life. So they become pregnant, they give birth to the child, they are responsible for the early education of the child, for the child to learn the value system of the family, for the child to learn the cultures, the heritage of the society. So mothers play a very, very strong role in every family. And add to that, now they are bread earners. Sometimes they lead single-headed families. So they have a very important role to play. When you compare that with women with disabilities, now what is happening with women with disabilities? They are considered as burdens. They are considered as people who cannot take care of themselves. And at the most, they can take very limited care of themselves. Somebody has to take care of them. So they don't fit. They don't fit the role that is given to women in the traditional society of India, which is actually an assumption. I must tell you when I talk to you about my mentors in the disability sector, I have three women leaders from whom I learned a lot of things about my right and everything. And that's how I could come up and practice those back in India. And these are women who are highly educated. They came up, they fought for their rights, they raised families, so they could do everything normally. But in India, we have not yet reached this point. So when you talk about intersectionality between gender and disability, you suddenly found that there are positive connotations and there are also negative connotations. And one of the connotations where women with disabilities due to lack of knowledge and awareness fare very poorly is the traditional role of a woman in the Indian society. Now let us come to another intersectionality where you find that there is a lot of commonality in the society. Now you find that how many of you have studied sociology? If you have studied sociology, you understand a word called social hierarchy. See, hierarchy, we know when we go to a corporate house, we know there are employees, or what do you call them, probationers, trainees go a little up. You have regular employees, higher up supervisors, higher up officers, then the board members, and then finally the chairman or chairperson. Now, every society, every family also has a hierarchy. So when we go back to the social hierarchy, we find that women were always at the lowest end of this hierarchy. And similarly, people with disabilities were always in the lowermost rung. So being at the lowermost hierarchy, where they had to serve, but their rights were not recognized. Please understand this, which I'm telling you right now is very, very important. They were there to serve everybody else, number one. Number two, their rights were not taken into consideration. This found reflection in both the feminism movement and in the disability movement. Because when you look at women per se, then women had the lowest hierarchy. Women with disabilities were further down, where their mothers, mother-in-laws, sisters, aunts, the other women who were in the lowermost hierarchy and were suffering started exploiting them. So it is very important for us to understand the social hierarchy and why this anger started. Now, women with disabilities, they found that they were doubly discriminated. First, the disability movements which started, they were led mostly by women. So women with disabilities, their rights, their special needs were not being considered by anyone. And so they were not being considered. And people with disabilities, they felt this, and then that's number one. Their rights were not being considered by the disability movement. And if they looked at the women's movement, they found the women's movement, and in fact, I can talk to you about 2005. In 2005, we had the basic, excuse me for a minute, please, just a minute. I'm babysitting a 3.5-year-old niece. So excuse me. Yes. So they found that they were being neglected by the men with disabilities in the disability movement. They were being discriminated by women in the general women's movement. So they were nowhere. And that is how a strong women's network started. It started in the US, UK, and found a very strong presence in Australia. In fact, if you look at the DAWN, DAWN, that is the Disabled Women's Network in Australia, you will find that this group has brought about some major changes, has sat there with the CRPD forum and the African women. In 2005, the Beijing Plus 5 seminar was held in the United Nations. What was this? We all know that the women's movement started gaining a lot of strength, and Beijing was the place where they came together. A lot of structural issues were met, a lot of demands with the government was being met. 5 years later, in 2005, the convention was held in the United Nations, and it was called Beijing Plus 5. So in Beijing Plus 5 in the United Nations, I was representing women from the Asia Pacific region. So I still remember a group of us, 6 or 7 of us, we stood outside the United Nations main office. We had nothing. So in the last moment, what we did is we wrote in white chart papers, count us, take us inside. We are your sisters. We are part of your movement. Why don't you consider our rights? And that's how slowly, women with disabilities got involved in the different women's movement. And all the disability movements, all the international disability organizations like Disabled People's International, Inclusion International, Rehabilitation International, all these organizations, the Blind Union, they started founding their women's cell. The women's conveners were being established. Women were coming into the forefront. Women were being allowed to take decisions. So that's how a strong presence of women with disabilities started. And with this, you see, with this, what happened? Every disability movement started embracing women with disabilities. For them also, this was an opportunity because their number suddenly was more. Already women with disabilities, they were there, but they were never getting counted. They were never coming to the forefront. They were never being, when the advocacy was happening somewhere, they were hidden. So suddenly this hidden group of women were very much visible. The disability movement in India became very vocal. And so this is one of the intersectionality, which is the social hierarchy, which is very important for us to remember. And then I would like to speak about another thing that we must remember. And this is another attribute of the disability sector. One, I told you it's a huge population if you consider the recent trends. And I will repeat these things again and again because these are important. Number one, the decadal growth of population has happened from 2011 to 2021. Number two, the World Report on Disability says we are 15%. Number three, the RPWD Act has increased the number of identified disabilities from 7 to 21. So we are a huge population. Second attribute, we are a heterogeneous population. That is, again, we must remember, very important. We cannot cut a coat and we said, look, I have cut a coat for all disabled people in India. We cannot write a book and we say, look, we have written a book for the disability sector. We cannot design a wheelchair and we say, look, we have an assistive device for the disabled people in India. Because we are heterogeneous, we are not homogeneous. If we move from the head to the eye, from the eye to the ear, from ear back to the mouth, from the mouth back to the head, to the hand, to the legs, any part of the body, even a 5% degrees change brings about completely different functional challenges, completely different accommodations that are needed, completely different assistive devices that are needed. So two things, homogeneous population, it's a huge population. Number two, it is a heterogeneous population. Number three, it is a poverty-stricken population. A lot of calculations have been done, and in the International Labour Organization, ILO has done a lot of work on that. Oxfam has done a lot of work on that. World Health Organization and World Bank have done a lot of work on that. And they have all come to the conclusion that it is a cycle, and it is a vicious cycle. If you are poor, then you are exposed to a lot of challenges. You don't get nutritious diet. You are not able to get the best treatment. You do not get access to good therapy, as a result of which, even if you have small disabilities, you become a severely disabled person. And if you are born with a disability, then you have to spend more. If two people are earning 100 rupees each, then I will have to spend 30 rupees for my extra disability care. And thus I become poor. So if I'm disabled, I become poverty stricken. If I'm poverty stricken, I become severely disabled. And this is a very cruel and vicious cycle which exists even today now in India. This cycle has to be broken. How this cycle can be broken? Better education, more number of people, children with disabilities in school, more number of children with disabilities completing class 10th with some kind of a skill for working, more number of young people with disabilities getting into skill programs, getting employed, becoming entrepreneurs, are able to make some savings and working in good companies, not everybody in the unorganized sector. So these things have to be done. Then we can break this vicious cycle. Let us come to women. So this is another intersectionality. What has happened in case of women? If you compare men and women's wages in India, very recently, I think the Hindu group of publications, they had come out with a newspaper report where they had compared the salary of the vice chancellors of universities, the board members of different very big corporate houses, chairpersons of the banks, lecturers in colleges, teachers in schools, private tutors, and many other jobs. And there was an absolute clear divide showing that for the same job, men were earning more than women. Number one. Number two, in the top, as you move in the pyramid of the job pyramid, at the top, what was happening? There were more men than women. So women were not decision makers. So they were not able to change policies for equal pay for equal work. And women were getting paid less. Number three, they had more responsibilities back home. So they were not getting enough rest. They were not able to take enough care of their bodies. And number four, they had to rear children. They had to give birth to children as they were already weak. They were not getting a fair share of food. So they had to spend more on their health issues in maternity care. So comparing all these things, it was found that one of the ladders of the growth of feminism movement was because of this. So this commonality exists, this intersection between disability and between gender, when you look at it, is because whether they were women or whether they were disabled, they always got less pay for the same job. They got less food in the same household. They got less spending in healthcare in the same house. And women members exploited women with disabilities. So this is another intersectionality which has been elaborated, which has been discussed a lot. And then we finally come to gender discrimination, stigmatized approach to disability. Where is this available? This is a question I am asking all of you, because this is very much evident in India. In India, what do we see? There is a clear divide between the rich and the poor. 3% rich in India own 97%, and this is not a figure I'm giving you from out of the blue. This is a figure from the London School of Economics. 3% of the super rich in India, they capture 97% of the resources of India. And 97% of the rest of India is dependent upon the rest of the 3% of resources that is available. So do you understand the disparity that we are facing? Because of this disparity, we find that the haves and the have-nots, the affluent families and the less affluent families, there is a clear difference in how we approach disability and gender. See, women who come from rich families, if you do one thing, you just turn back the pages of history, go to the past 40, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. You will find women doctors. You will find women in the revolutionary movement. But all these women, they came from affluent families. Similarly, look at the disability movement. Most of the leaders of disability sector, they came from affluent families. So this is a commonality you can see both in the feminism movement and you can see in the disability movement. People who were affluent, people whose families could support them in the initial phases of discrimination or initial phases of getting educated and employment. These were people who could climb to the top. So when we are talking about why this thing is so important, for me, this thing is very important because unless you are able to bring all people to parity, unless all people with disabilities get the same treatment, they get the same opportunities, then we cannot bring about equality in the society. We cannot think of development. Very recently, our Prime Minister announced that India will be becoming a $1 trillion economy. But to become a $1 trillion economy, 15% of its population needs education. 44% of its women with disabilities are women, among which every one woman among 5 women is a woman with disability. So these women also get this opportunity. It will not be possible for us to create an equal hierarchy. So while trying to bring my discussion to an end, I just want to show you some great women, and I will tell you why I consider them as great women. These, I have 3. I was also a young girl with an eye full of dream. I suddenly lost everything in life. I had no way to, the job in hand, the Indian Civil Services was taken away from me. Rejection, humiliation, again and again and again. And then I joined the disability movement called the Disabled People's International India chapter as the convener Women's Cell, and I traveled across the world. When I started traveling from 1996, visiting countries, going and participating in international meetings and conferences, I became aware that I have rights. I have nothing to feel ashamed of. Bodily imperfections, bodily challenges, these can be managed by reasonable accommodation. In my case, a wheelchair, or when traveling a long distance by using a catheter and a Euro bag instead of being dependent on, many a times when we traveled in the earlier days, as there were no accessible toilets, we had to use catheters. Many of us were dependent on that, because then we were, at least we were dry, and we did not have accidents and we did not have misfortunes. There are 2 women you see on my screen. I will tell you about the woman with the black coat. She is Dr. Teresa Digener, a woman I look up to. How I met her is something very interesting. I was in the UN and there is a conference, and I'm just walking in the lobby. And there is this woman, she is sitting cross-legged, and with her right leg, in the left lap, a little infant is lying. With her right leg, she opens her shirt buttons, then picks her baby and breastfeeds her. For me, someone from India who did not have an accessible bus, who was fighting to get into the mainstream school, this was a image, a scene out of a movie. So with unconsciously, unknowingly, I was staring at her. Suddenly she looked up and she smiled, and without being angry, in the Western countries, they don't like to be stared at. And if you stare, they're really rude and they tell you something. But this lady, she just smiled up and said, "Hello, who are you?" "I'm Teresa." So I just looked at her and I became conscious, and I said, "I'm extremely sorry. I'm extremely sorry. I did not mean to stare at you, but what you are doing is something unimaginable." She had no hands, just 2 legs. And she was from Germany. She had suffered from, I don't know if many of you have heard about the thalidomide disaster. This medicine caused thousands of babies to be born without hands, and very malformed, rudimentary hands, and so on. So Teresa did not have hands, yet she studied. She went to a law college and she became a law professor. And she is one of the key persons who drafted the CRPD, Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability. She became my mentor. She taught me what are my rights. She taught me how I should fight for my rights. She taught me the different languages that I should speak, how I should talk to a legislator, a politician, how should I talk to a development professional or a bureaucrat, how should I talk to the media, and what are my rights, and how I should never shy away from talking about my rights. And this is another leader, Dina Radke, who's taught me always look beautiful. And she always dressed herself, and she had beautiful hair color. She would have a red hair matching her red outfits, and then someday she would be using a blue hair to match her blue outfits, lovely earrings, very gentle, delicate. And today she is very active in Germany, Dina Radke. And there was a third this thing I I could not put her photo today. Her name is Lucy Wong Hernandez. She is from Mexico. She was then the secretary of Disabled People's International. She taught me a lot of things. She told me, Shruti, we are disabled. But when one looks at you, you must be so well dressed, so nicely groomed that they are stuck at your face. First, they look at you, your clothes, and then they look at your disability. And that's a lesson I kept in my heart, and I always made it a point to look good, irrespective of the fact that I was among 100 people without disabilities or 5,000 young employees without disabilities in SAP campus in Bangalore. I always dressed myself well and presented myself well. And this is a beautiful photo I want to share with you. There's a very nice cartoonist, KK Rath, and he made this cartoon on my on this thing, and he has published it in many places. This was borrowed by my friend Jayashree Ravindran, who came out with a magazine. He said, I said, why have you done this? He said, this implies that many of you women with disabilities, you dream big and you try to achieve those dreams. And people like me, who are part of this mainstream society, women like my counterparts here in my newspaper company, if we create a little space for you, then we can truly become a beautiful society. And all of you with your unique potential can become great achievers. So this is what I feel. This when we talk about intersectionality of disability and gender, when we talk about all the development frames that are happening, the way the dialogues are moving in the university, one section, the disabled cannot achieve for the disabled. The women cannot achieve for the women. Men, women, all of us have to come together. All together, when we come together and we work for a cause, planet Earth can be sustained. We're all going through a very difficult time. Our planet is endangered, and all of us have to work together to reduce fossil fuel use, to reduce pollution, to reduce nuclear disasters. See what happened in COVID-19 pandemic. No country could close its door to COVID, the virus. The virus went all around the world, affecting all of us. And because many brains came together in many countries of the world, that in the history of humanity, we could create a vaccine so early and could come back to life. And that is how the disability sector, the women's movement, women with disabilities, people with disabilities, different gender, caste, class, borders, barriers. We have to break all this. Only thing we have to remember is we are all human beings. If we are separate, it is only by our blood groups. And all of us have to work together to sustain planet Earth. Thank you. I am now open to questions. Please go ahead. Oh, these are some great women with disabilities of India. I'll leave it on your screen and I'm open for questions. Yes, please. Who will facilitate the question answers? Hello, Akshay?
Yes, ma'am.
Who will, can we have the question and answers?
Yes. Guys, do we have questions for today's session? Anyone who wants to go ahead?
Okay. So before we close, let me introduce to these great women on your screen. Next to me is Anuradha Mohit, who is visually...
Sorry, ma'am, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Yes, so I was thinking that being a woman, we are already contained by so many ideas of having an ideal body. So being a disabled woman, I guess it is more and more difficult for women with disability to being contained with one's own body, and have have a positive body image. So how do you think we can work on that ideas in our maybe schools or colleges or institutions?
Yes, this has been a very strong thing. There are two things now. One is art for disabled, and one is disability art. Actually, this body structure of women with disabilities.
Shruti,
Yes,
sorry,
Arun.
Shruti, your voice suddenly went down.
Uh, can you hear me now?
It's better.
Hello,
Yeah,
hello. Better?
yeah, better.
Okay. So, this construct of a disabled women's body, it has not yet very strongly come up in discourses, literary discourses, but disability arts, artists with disabilities have taken this up in a very strong way. And you will find now a lot of portrait making, a lot of sculpture, a lot of dialogues around this. In India also, a very beautiful film had come. I think after today's discourse, please go and watch it. It is called Margarita with a Straw. It's about a
Yes.
young woman with disability who is
Hmm.
exploring her body and who is exploring her sexuality. And it is on the life of a very young and smart woman, Malini Chip, who is very
Yes.
severely disabled, has severe cerebral palsy, cannot talk, uses a communicator. She has a little communicator on her lap. She presses it. Severely
Hmm.
disabled, on the wheelchair, travels everywhere alone, goes to London, does every activity on earth independently. Malini Chip. Kalki Kochlin is the actress who played
Actress of
the
the
role.
movie. Yes.
This is a
Yes.
beautiful movie. The question that you have asked, you can get a lot of answers when you look at this movie. See, Minu, you have to address women with disabilities as women first. You have to
Yes.
understand that every woman with disabilities has similar challenges, has similar needs, biological or emotional. And once you start respecting that, the mothers, the mother in laws, the sisters, the classmates, the neighborhood friends, when these women start respecting women with disabilities, the rest will be a simple theoretical exercise.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, next, please.
Do we have more questions?
Shruti, please introduce those women. Those are very important.
Yes, I have to do that before closing. All great women of India, I want you to meet some of the great women. So to my right is Anuradha Mohit in a orange colored dupatta. She is visually impaired, and she has one amazing sense of humor. So Anuradha, because she was born 100% blind, her father said, she tells me, Shruti, my family, in very encouraging, said, beta, ab Gana सीख लो तुम. Then I said, Ghana? मुझे तो गाना अच्छा ही नहीं लगता है. She went ahead. She defied the norms of being, you must remember, defied the norms of being a blind girl. She studied. She became part of Disabled People's International. She became a lecturer. She was part of the National Human Rights Commission. And then she became the director of National Institute of the Visually Handicapped in Dehradun. Amazing woman. Next to her, a great woman, Poonam Natarajan, whom I called Poonam Didi. Poonam Didi was born with a boy who had intellectual disability. Poonam Didi did not give up. She just got ready, educated herself, trained herself, took care of her son's education by herself, organized the parents of all children with intellectual disability, started talking, as I told you, the disability sector, if it was a person with orthopedic impairment, they forgot about when the first our law came in India, PWD Act, we forgot about children who have intellectual disabilities, who have autism and other things. So parents led by Poonam Didi, Aloka Didi, this great mother, Sudha Kaulji, then Mrs. Chib, they all came together and they fought for the rights of their children. And later on, she became the chairperson of National Trust. National Trust was founded in
Mary
India.
Barua.
Hello?
No, Mary Barua of autism. Autism.
I'm coming down to her also. She's there. So this is Poonam Natarajan. Next to Poonam Natarajan in sari and a smiling face is one of my best friends in the sector, Jayashree Ravindran. She has a never to die attitude. She cannot hear. She has to lip read. She has to see your face if you're standing in front of her speaking. She has to see your lips and understand what you are speaking. But she was there with Igno, a professor. She has brought about some amazing changes in India. She heads an outfit called as Ability Foundation in Chennai. She goes, liaises with cinema actors, university professors, livelihood soft skills, and does amazing things, not just for people with hearing impairment. Earlier, inclusive dance, she's the first person to bring about inclusive dances. 3 are dancers without disabilities. She and our actress Revati, and no, another woman with hearing impairment. She cannot hear, but she feels the rhythm of the music, and she is a Bharatnatyam certified dancer. She brought about artists together and broke the norm that artists with disability are no less than other people. Down there in short hair is Professor Ketna Mehta. She was the dean of a management institute uh, in Mumbai, in Maharashtra. She founded Meena Foundation, an organization which looks at the needs of people with spinal cord injuries. She's intense woman, organizes many public meetings, gets people together, and spreads a lot of awareness. She's a frontline activist and has brought about many policy changes in India. Next to her is Malini Chip's mother. Arun, what is Mrs. Chip's full name?
Sorry, Sruti, I don't really know. I don't know.
Okay, why I'm forgetting, I really...
Yes,
Okay.
Nilima, is it Nilima by chance?
No, not Nilima. Anyway, I'll tell you, it'll come back to me. She is a brave mother. When her daughter Malini Chip was born with severe disabilities, multiple disabilities, she first educated herself. Then she started an education system in Mumbai and is one of the pioneers of inclusive education in India. Next to her is Sudha Kaulji, another brave mother. Her son had cerebral palsy and she started the first Spastic Society of India. And when the Rights of Persons with Disability Act was formulated, she was the chairperson of the group. Next to her, a brave mother who brought autism into focus. Today we are all celebrating Autism Day on 2nd of April. This is the great mother whose son had autism. She did not give up. She educated her son, did home education, herself became an expert. And today in India, if the autism movement has come to forefront, it is because of Mary Barua. Mary Barua, Sudha Kaul, Mrs. Chib, Ketna Mehta, Anuradha, Mohit, Poonam Natarajan, Jayashree Ravindran. These are some great women I respect. They are my colleagues. And we have all worked together in this panel. And Arun Rao, who is now signing for you, has also been in the forefront of this movement. So it is possible because our families stood behind us, they believed in us, they pushed us forward. What we need now is young people like you to become harbingers of change in India. We have the best laws. We are talking about inclusion at the international level. What is required in India is a change in mindset. And that change comes when the intersectionality between gender, between disability, between all the things that you can think of, education, employment, everything is looked at. India will become one beautiful, inclusive country. Thank you very much. So we end here if there are no more questions. Akshay?
Does anyone have any questions regarding the lecture? Please feel free to ask, otherwise we'll close the lecture. Okay, I don't think there are any more questions. CG,
Thank you,
please.
Akshay.
CG, please go ahead with the conclusion.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an insightful lecture. I'm sure we all benefited a lot from this.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for taking out time on such a short notice. I know you have been busy with the work, but thank you so much. I'm sure your lecture was very
For
helpful.
today ends here. Please feel free to leave the meeting. Information regarding the next lecture. Will be intimated
great to
as
see
usual
you.
through email and
Thank
WhatsApp.
you, all
Once
of
again,
you.
ma'am.
Nice to see you.
Nice. Wonderful.
Thank you, Kriti. Thank you so much.
All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Preeti.